Hello there, fearfully and wonderfully made human. Today, I'm delighted to introduce a fascinating guest, Bill Prasad. We met just last month at the Wise Practice Summit in North Carolina, where we instantly connected over our shared experiences as speakers. I was thrilled to share that my presentation at the summit was actually my first CEU talk amongst peers. And Bill, with such generosity, offered some invaluable advice. Bill has an impressive journey that took him from an Emmy Award winning journalism career to the owner of a successful group practice in Houston, Texas. Today, he's a licensed professional counselor and licensed chemical dependency counselor with a specialization in trauma, addiction, and leadership coaching. His reach extends beyond his practice. Bill's been a corporate trainer, crisis responder, and facilitator for companies, government entities, and even the military. His background is a unique blend of media, psychology, and crisis management, allowing him to make an impact across various industries. With a master's in counseling psychology and additional postgraduate certifications from Johns Hopkins and the University of Houston downtown, Bill's expertise is both broad and deep. His impressive past includes senior leadership roles at hospitals and work as an employee assistance counselor with Raytheon and the Office of Naval Intelligence. I'm thrilled for you all to get to know Bill Prasad today and learn from his expertise and insights. You can find more about him and his work at prasadcounseling.com, which I will put in the show notes. Please join me in welcoming Bill. Bill, thank you for coming on the show.
You're welcome, Diana. It is my pleasure. And you forgot to mention that I'm a bounty hunter also.
What? Uh,
Just kidding.
I was just like, wait, man. I I thought I got it all bounty hunt. Well, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends up on your resume later on in life too. So tell me, like, how did you go from breaking news to breaking stigma?
Well put. I had been working in television news for about 15 years, and I remember standing on the White House lawn. I was in my 40s and thinking, well, there really isn't anything else for me to do in journalism. I love the job. It's been a great run, but what do I want from the rest of my life? And a
Mm.
lot of the questions that I was asking myself surrounded quality of life into my 40s, 50s, and 60s. And that's when I started thinking about the next career. And I thought, surely I can do more with my education, my experience, and my skills.
Yeah. Okay. So tell me a little bit about like because we had this conversation, but I want the listener to know like journalism because that could go everywhere. So tell me a little bit about that part of your life. Like where,
Sure.
you know what I mean? Like where'd you go? What you do? What did you cover? Were you just like, a sensationalist one or not? Or was it like serious? Like you got an Emmy award. Like tell me, please.
Well, my undergraduate degree is actually in newspaper editorial and newspaper management. So I started my career working for a small newspaper in the Philadelphia suburbs
Mm.
and then moved on to radio. So I did radio in the Philly suburbs in New Jersey. Then something called cable television was launching at the time. And there was a new TV station that was launching in Wilmington, Delaware.
Okay.
And so we had to go in and audition for positions. And I remember thinking, okay, the best way to audition and to get it right was they were going to shoot stand-ups of us outside. And I thought, well, how about if I stand in front of a car and talk about how this car was used in a holdup and they got away with $5 million? I certainly wouldn't forget that this is a car. And so I thought that is the best way to remember the stand-ups for the audition.
Mm-hmm.
So I got called in to do the audition. It was raining outside. And they brought me into a studio and they said, well, we'd actually want you to read to two cameras. The two cameras did not have teleprompters. And they handed me copy to read. And I went to pick it up, and the general manager put his hand over my hand and said, no, we want you to read it cold.
Oh my word. And
So
I know that stuff because I was in the film industry for a second there. Oh my God.
So there I was reading cold copy
Oh.
to several cameras. I did it 4 or 5 times and left thinking, well, I did my best. I probably didn't get the job.
Hmm.
And I got the job.
Wow.
So I ended up working as a reporter in Wilmington, Delaware,
Hmm.
then went on to Waco, Texas, then on to Asheville, Carolina, North Carolina. Then
Hmm.
from Asheville, North Carolina, I went to Oklahoma City. And then from Oklahoma City, I went to Seattle.
Wow.
Then from Seattle to Philadelphia, Philadelphia to Baltimore, Baltimore to Washington, and then eventually started working for two networks as a national correspondent. I worked for CNN and Fox News. This was around between 2000 and 2006.
Hmm.
TV network news was very different then. I could
Yes.
navigate both CNN and Fox seamlessly.
Right. Wow. Okay. And yeah, because now, according to how what I hear, because I hardly ever watch the news, CNN and Fox are like so opposite. So how would you do that? Because it was an investigative, investigative journalism.
No, not with the networks. I
Okay.
worked as a national correspondent, so I covered the White House, Congress,
Ah.
FBI,
Okay.
CIA, Pentagon, all of the ABCs. By the way,
Hmm.
do you know what NSA stands for?
NSA. I National Security. No.
It stands for No Such Agency.
Oh.
It's these folks are spies, and that's real.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So I know that according to, our conversations before and stuff, like because you were course, being this journalist going to these places, you were breaking news like in very traumatic situations, correct?
Yes, as a reporter, whether
Mm-hmm.
it is a local news reporter or a national reporter, you're exposed to a lot of trauma.
Mm-hmm.
In the various cities throughout the country, I reported on a large number of natural disasters, homicides, some really horrifying incidents and accidents. And then when I was in Seattle,
Mm-hmm.
it was the Murrah building that was blown up, the federal building in Oklahoma City, April 19th, 1995. And they flew me to Oklahoma City a couple of hours after it was blown up. I reported on that. And then when I was based in Washington, D.C., I was there for 9/11 when the plane hit the Pentagon. So I covered that also.
Oh, wow. Okay. So how did you stay so focused? Because I know I've seen, on the news, the journalist, the reporter has to stay because you're sharing this information with the world. And did you go to your own therapy? How did, you like to share with us, like, how did you stay sane when things were not being sane?
Right. I have always been devoutly dedicated to making sure I take care of myself. So I have always worked out regularly. I
Mm-hmm.
have always eaten well. I've always maintained a relationship with a therapist even before I got into the mental health world.
Wow.
Had good friends, had a lot of support, and then had a sense of spirituality in that I've seen some really bad things. And
Yeah.
given the depth of terror that I've seen, it is easy for your spirituality to be fractured.
Yes.
And I never really got to that point. I always had a sense of either spirituality or a sense of resiliency, that people are resilient, that
Mm-hmm.
we can make it through this.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I really held on to that. There are times when I did start to slide into places where I was starting to feel cynical instead of skeptical about people,
Mm-hmm.
but I was able to catch myself in those places
Okay.
and recover.
Yeah. And I think that's so important for us to hear because you and I are in an industry, the mental health industry, or is it a calling? Is it something you can train? Is it resiliency training? Is it And I know that, like, say for COVID, right? That was something that was a traumatic, worldwide traumatic natural disaster experience. And I remember when everything was coming down, I'm like, oh, wow, this high school that I'm serving as a therapist, I got to get it together. And so I
Mhm.
went to natural disaster training and disaster, with Dwight Bain is his name. I don't know if you know him or not, but he's in Florida. And I just because he does what you did. He wasn't a journalist, but that whole disaster psychology.
Mhm.
And I learned so much and I'm so grateful for that training. So for you, is this something that you utilize from all your experience in either training other therapists or even how you deal with the clients, patients that come to you?
I think that trauma is not a stranger to me. Having been around people who are victims of terrorist attacks or victims of crime for so many years as a reporter, stepping into another career where I'm around them again
Mm-hmm.
did not feel different,
Yeah.
did not feel really did not inspire a lot of fear in me. I have a certain comfort level with trauma. And so I'm able to navigate those situations pretty effectively, mostly because of what I had to navigate when I was a reporter.
Yeah, I can imagine. So tell me, like, as understanding first responders, right? Because they face tough emotional challenges,
Mhm.
you know, can you tell me what you've learned working with them? Especially how they
Sure.
perceive being assigned to light or desk duty. Because some of them, like I know a little bit from working in an alternative high school, I would talk to the police officers that were there the whole time. Like, it was the second we're open, a cop was there and they let, and then they left when we closed the school for the day and stuff. And that was like an extra detail that they were able. And I would talk to them and ask them questions like, how do you handle that? How do you handle like a car accident or somebody getting shot and stuff? And I know I wouldn't be able to do that. So, like, how did you, you know, what do you do with them or what did you learn from them?
Well, for 4 years, I directed the behavioral health arm for Fairfax County Fire and Rescue. And this is one of the largest career fire departments in the country. And so I work mostly with firefighters, about 90% firefighters and 10% police. And I got a really intimate opportunity to get to know them, not just at the government building, but I would spend a lot of time doing ride-alongs with them. I'd ride in either the engine or the medic unit, and I'd go with them on fires and car accidents. When I first told some of my colleagues in the mental health field that I was going to do that, they said, "You don't want to do that. I don't want to do. I would not get into a fire engine." I
Mm.
thought, I can't wait to
Mm,
get into that unit and go with them.
right.
So this was a tremendous opportunity to understand them and to be in their world, to understand what their world is like. And that was also an opportunity to build trust because I've never been a firefighter or a medic.
Mm-hmm.
But being with them side by side for 8 to 10 hours a day and eating with them, that is one of the ways that you build trust.
Mm.
Some of the things that I learned about firefighters is that these men and women are some of the funniest people you can work with. And it's dark humor. Uh,
Okay.
John Q. Citizen would not really understand what they joke about. Now, I also learned that there is a line in the sand in reference to humor, that a firefighter who might be having trouble might joke about something that you never joke about in the fire service, and that is the death of a child.
Mm,
That is over the line. And that is
right.
also one of, if not the toughest call for a
Yeah.
firefighter or a paramedic when a child dies in an accident or failed CPR of a child. I remember doing a critical incident response with a group of firefighters who were called to a house, and it was very clear that the child had been physically abused.
Mm,
And of course, they report that, but having to see that, having to care for the child was really hard. And in some of those situations where there has been a child seriously hurt or a child killed, it was my job, along with a trained peer, we were part of a trained team to go to the fire station and do something called a critical incident stress management diffusing. It's a group meeting because these folks work in groups.
Hmm.
These are teams. With police officers, at times police officers ride alone. So when we would work with police officers, at times it was one-on-one. When we worked with firefighters, it was always in groups. And an interesting thing developed. One of the first things that you ask when they come back is there anything we can get for you? Water, food, what do you need?
Yeah.
Because that is the first step toward trying to get them back to a place of functioning, where things have balanced out, where they feel secure. And with firefighters who were parents, one of the first things they'd ask for is, can I call home? Can I
Mm.
talk to my kids? Can I talk
Oof.
to whomever is taking care of my kids?
I can
So
imagine.
they'd ask for that first.
Mhm.
I remember when I would do ride-alongs, when I first got a sense of what their humor was like, was we were all eating French fries and hamburgers at the big table for lunch, and the alarm went off, and so we went out on a call, came back, and someone had written on my brown paper bag that had been torn open with my food. They wrote out in ketchup, "Help me."
Oh my God. No.
Now I knew immediately that was a practical joke.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of men and women that I work with. They are so dedicated, they
Mm.
work so hard, and it is true that they will just run into a burning building.
Yeah. I
When
mean,
that
that's their
alarm goes off, that's what they do.
right. I mean, that's their training, that's their job. So, what do you think they actually do need, say, as a therapist that wants to go into the field of disaster psychology or first responders, or, you know what I mean? Like, you have the experience. So, what would you say to someone that might be like one of my interns that might be listening that might want to go into the field you're in? You know, what would be the first steps to help or to get the knowledge that they need to be an effective therapist without them having the vicarious trauma and they get burnt out? Because, we can get burnt out if we don't take care of ourselves, but it might not be the calling for you either. So,
In most master's programs and PhD or PsyD programs, there isn't any training in reference to what I just described, that you
exactly.
have to pick up the training on your own,
Mhm.
that it takes a lot of training and a lot of comfort to walk into a room where maybe all these people in the room at a company, yesterday, they stepped over the bodies of their coworkers after a mass shooting. And remember, it's not counseling. It's generally a one-off meeting, and you go in, you attempt to stabilize them, you try to get a sense of who needs what,
Mhm.
you provide them with some education as to what they might be dealing with over the next few days, such as maybe interruptions in sleep patterns, interruptions in eating patterns, maybe increased sense of anger. So you go through all of those various symptoms, and then you ask them, has anyone seen some of those symptoms? And then you talk about what symptoms might occur when they go home, when they're around their loved ones, what their loved ones might see. So a lot of it is stability and then providing education, and
Mhm.
then going forward, providing them with a sense of who might need help. And what I mean by that is they always ask, well, how will I know if I need help? And we'll
Right.
talk about the timeline. Where might you be 30 days from here? And how might you recognize that you need additional help? And then we provide resources. In many cases, that resource is either an employee assistance program, or if it's first responders, making sure they get connected to whatever counseling center is on the campus or available to each fire station.
Okay. How about if there is a first responder, police officer, a veteran, someone that's, served the community because they're servants of the community that, and they go and do the hard job. And they're listening and because I did notice there's a stigma big time
Mhm.
where it's like, I can't seem that looks weak, or if I'm scared that I'm going to end up behind a desk, or I'm scared I'm going to end up being crazy or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it just becomes this vicious cycle and they're actually needing help. What would you say to that person? Not, to someone that might be going, "Oh my goodness, I'm having nightmares." What should they do?
For the therapist, I would encourage the therapist to get to know that community by spending time with them. You
Okay.
really can't walk into a fire station and say, you won't be seen as weak. Go to a therapist. It really isn't as simple as that. Therapist has to get to know what this community is like and how they function. In reference to the firefighters, one of the ways that I would try to win them over, besides eating with them and doing ride-alongs, is to explain, here's what we do, and you may never need that, but it's important that you know because you might be able to help another firefighter.
Okay.
And that really went to their sense of helping others. That connected pretty well.
Okay. Wow. All right. So tell me how your disaster psychology influenced your wellness programs that you provide for companies. Like, well, tell me what you provide first, and then let me know how like the disaster psychology works with that. I mean, I think you shared a little, but I want to know more about your programs.
Sure. So companies call me in to do an assortment of corporate trainings. It can be on anxiety or stress and burnout in the workplace. It could be on suicide prevention.
Mhm.
It could be a situation where they've recently had a suicide, and a few months later, they want someone to come in and talk to them about suicide and what to do if someone becomes suicidal. I also do trainings on leadership. Companies bring me in, and I work with managers in reference to leadership, and I use servant leadership as my model. How to lead through difficult times, how to lead through change. So there are all types of topics that I will train companies on. And since the pandemic, it used to be 100% of my trainings were on site.
Mm.
Now, post-pandemic,
Mhm.
it's about 15% trainings on site and the rest virtual, which means the whole world has opened up now. I could be doing a training for a company in Japan or London, Canada, anywhere.
Okay. Yeah, I mean that's the positive side of what happened to us. This too, I hear like us being
Mhm.
able to Zoom, and you're in Texas, I'm in Florida, so I have to always look at the positive and stay focused. But I want to know more about the training, okay? Because to me, like you said you have different subjects. So is there like a menu, or are you able to, like, say a company says, well, I like the way you speak about this, but can you speak about that? And then you
Mhm.
create it yourself, and then you bring it together and then go and present it.
There are times when a company will come up with an idea, we'll talk about it. I will want to talk to senior leaders, then I'll want to talk to employees to ask them, what do you think you need? A lot of companies make the mistake of deciding what their employees need, but they
Mm,
don't ask the employees. So I get connected to all of that. And then if they ask me to actually put together the product, then I put together an evidence-based, research-based PowerPoint presentation. It's not PowerPoint by death. Um, it is an animated, at times, performance, because what I learned from television is that I could learn and know, I could be the subject matter expert. But if I didn't keep people interested, if I didn't show energy and personality, then people will disconnect. So it's never 90% subject matter knowledge and 10% personality. It's usually 50-50. And when speaking to companies, somewhere along the way, I've got to connect to the audience and they've got to like me. If they
mhm.
dislike me and feel like I'm stiff or that they can't connect to me at all, then they're really not going to absorb the material. So
No.
a company will come to me directly, or a company will be a client of an employee assistance program. And that company will ask that EAP, well, we'd like a trainer to come in. And then that EAP has access to a bank of experts. Then the EAP calls me or sends me an email that says, Bill, could you train on this day? Here's the subject. Are you comfortable with that? And then we go from there.
Okay. Do you like doing that, or do you like doing one-on-one therapy, or both, or like which one do you like more?
Well, I like a variety. My private practice has never been wall-to-wall patient contact. It's
Okay.
always been three revenue streams: patient contact,
Mhm.
corporate trainings,
Wow.
and then the critical incident stress management work.
Okay. So is that your niche? Like that's what you're known for?
Yes.
Okay, that's wonderful. So, you talked about storytelling, right? Because it is important. You're right. Like if I sat here monotone and you sat here monotone and they're listening, they're they're gonna turn that off real quick, or they use it
Right.
for
It would
sleep
look
aid.
like this.
Exactly.
Yes, I could blindfold you with dental floss. You'd start to fall asleep.
Yeah. So, can you share a story from, where your storytelling to, like the way you are made a big difference in when you were training?
I do try to drop in stories. And when I talk about journalism at times, someone will ask me, well, did you ever make a mistake on the air?
Mm,
And I tell the story of how standing in front of the Murrah building, that moments after it was blown up, hours after, and I thought to myself, this is the worst thing that I'm ever going to see as a journalist.
mm,
And of course, 6 years later, I was wrong.
yeah.
And some of the things that I've seen have just gone beyond the realm of what I thought reality was.
I,
And then let me tell a funny story. So I was a new reporter in Oklahoma City. And it was right around Christmas, and the Oklahoma City, the government, city government, they bring in a tree every year, a very big, tall tree, and they light the tree at around 5 o'clock. And of course, that's right around news time. So the TV station always sent a reporter out to do a live shot. And the reporter would go out and the city would tell him, okay, we're going to light it in 60 seconds. The reporter would call the station and say, okay, we're going to go in 60 seconds. The anchors would throw to the reporter. The reporter would talk about the tree, how tall it is, and there it is, isn't it beautiful? Well, that's not exactly the way it
mm,
goes. I didn't know it, but every year they pick the newest reporter to go out on that story because they know that the reporter will be standing there and they'll be told a minute, but it's not really a minute. It'll go a minute and a half, 2 minutes, and you just have to keep talking. So I went out there not knowing this. The government official said, "Okay, we're going to light it in a minute." I called the station. They hit me live. I
mhm.
started talking. Now, as a TV reporter, you have a clock in your head. You can measure things within 5 seconds because so much of your world comes down to seconds, not minutes, seconds. So I started talking, and in my head, I heard a little voice saying, "Okay, we hit a minute. They're a little bit late." I kept talking. We're at a minute 15 now. We're at a minute and a half. Now, this is a long time to just be yapping.
Yeah.
Now we're closing in on 2 minutes, and I'm starting to run out of things to say. So I thought, well, I've already talked about the ornaments, how tall the tree is. I should talk about who's responsible for getting the tree here. So I talked about how the city of Oklahoma City, along with a number of civic groups, are all responsible for the Christmas tree's erection. Now, grammatically, that is correct.
Hmm.
You can imagine what was going on in my head when, as soon as I said those words,
Right.
and I just kept talking anyway.
Yeah.
But I thought, I am mortified.
Did you show it?
I
Do we have clips? Can
no,
we find these
no, I
clips?
didn't. You can't because it was too long ago. But when I got back to the TV station,
Mhm.
you can imagine the razzing
Yeah.
that I was hearing. And then I find out, yeah, every year we find the brand new reporter and just send them out there
Just to
to
see
see
what
what happens.
happens.
To flip back to a darker note, when
Mm.
I was leaving Oklahoma City to move to Seattle,
Hmm.
I gave them 4 weeks notice and something unusual happened. They hired a reporter in 2 weeks. It's generally really difficult to get someone moved and hired in 4 weeks. So
Hmm.
the last week I was there, I met the person who was taking my place. Now, I was one of two reporters working at night, just two people working at night. And I was known as the reporter that loved reporter participation. So if there was something I could do, like get in an airplane or jump out of an airplane or whatever, I would do it.
Okay.
So the woman's name was Kathy Jones. And so she talked to me about when we moved here. I've been married for so long, and we're thinking about building a family here and having a baby. And so we got to know each other a little bit. And then I moved to Oklahoma City and forgot about it. Months go by. I am in the newsroom in Oklahoma City, and one of the producers said, "Bill, didn't you work in Oklahoma City?" And I said, "Yeah." And he said, "Well, there was an air show there, and one of the reporters at a TV station, he named the TV station, was in one of the planes. They let her ride in one of the planes. The
Hmm.
plane did a barrel roll and didn't come out of it,
Oh
went right into the
no.
ground,
Oh my
and she was
goodness.
killed." And I thought, that's horrible. And that would have been a 50-50 chance that that was me,
Yeah.
maybe even more than a 50-50 chance because my hand would have gone up to say, okay, great, you get to ride in an airplane. I want to do that.
Hmm.
So that was a bizarre situation.
Yeah. I mean, and that makes you think, that makes you just understand life, right? Like, wow. So
Mhm.
wouldn't that be sort of like what people go through with survivor guilt in a way? No?
I felt really awful. I didn't really feel any guilt
Hmm.
because I had not caused the accident.
Right.
I was in no way connected to that. But saying to me, there's a 50-50 chance you would have been on that plane.
Right.
That's a little bit of a bizarre story.
Yeah. It is a bizarre story. Like it makes you realize how fragile life is,
Hmm.
but at the same time, how resilient we can be in it, you know? And
Yeah.
as so let's talk about that. Let's talk a little bit about how we could break the stigma, right? Because, I'm sure we could talk about more of the stories. Like I could ask you, like, what was the most impactful story that you ever went live into and that you will never forget, you know? And then how how did that help you now become a really good therapist?
It would have been 9/11.
Okay.
That for days, there were days when I would just sleep in the news van. They'd send us food, we'd sleep, we'd start the next day. And it really helped me understand resilience to a degree that I just never thought I'd ever see. The Pentagon itself was like a mini city with its own generators brought in, its own lighting, and its own mortuary. And it was a really hard time.
Yeah.
It
I
was
mean, I'm already
very,
tearing up because I think if the second you say 9/11, anybody that was able to remember things, because I do. And yeah, I remember exactly where I was, what was happening, and for you to be a reporter live there, that's like, whoa, whoa. So how how do with something like this, what would be practical tips and tools? Because honestly, like we might, hopefully not, but we might have another school shooting, another natural disaster like what just happened. Sorry, I'm an emotional therapist. So when I think about stuff like that,
Mhm.
sorry,
That's okay.
my
Hard to
listeners know
take.
me. Yeah, they know how
It's
I
hard to
am.
take.
Yeah.
In the months after 9/11, if
Mhm.
you lived in the Washington, D.C. area, I thought for a while that we were the most highly traumatized area in the world because you might remember that after 9/11, in the month of October, there were two men driving around shooting people at random, the sniper slangs,
Oh my
and they
goodness.
killed a number of people. And then we had the anthrax problem.
Yeah.
And then we had the worst case of West Nile virus in the nation's history that summer. So for a while, you'd look in the air, you'd see a plane, you'd be reminded of what happened. You had to open your mail, but there was fear around it. You had to go out and get groceries and go to a gas station, but there was fear around that.
Mhm.
And you had to leave your house during the summer and you were worried about mosquitoes.
Yeah.
So I had never seen anything like that pushed together between September and July.
Hmm. Yeah. And so now that you look back and we made it through, the people that were able to hopefully, in a healthy way, and there's people that are still suffering, honestly, because maybe they don't have the tools or like, I know with the Parkland shooting here, I kept hearing, and that's when I went back to being a therapist. I wasn't a therapist at the time, and that's why God called me to be a therapist again. I'm like, oh, okay. EMDR, I'm not an EMDR specialist at all, but I was told that quite a few people that helped them a lot. Is there other tools or um, modalities that you feel is very beneficial that somebody might want to look into if they're still
Mm.
struggling with certain things like, the traumatic experiences?
Yes. If you are wrestling with trauma, remember that trauma is highly treatable. That the old school of trauma treatment was, well, we'll just help you manage some of your stuff so you'll be okay. The
Mhm.
newer school is that no, we can help you recover, and recovery could be measured in you just don't meet criteria for PTSD anymore. You're functioning a lot higher.
Mhm.
So as far as evidence-based treatments that I use EMDR. And then I used CPT, cognitive processing therapy, or I used prolonged exposure therapy.
What is
There are
that?
some others, but pardon me?
Can you explain prolonged exposure therapy? I'm not very
Sure.
versed on that.
So the whole idea around brain habituation is the theory, well, it's clinically been proven that if you repeatedly and in a measured way expose someone to a certain stimulus, eventually they will become accustomed to it.
Okay.
So, for example, if we took you and your first job, maybe at a company, and we visited you on day one and said, use the Likert scale, one being I'm completely relaxed and 10 being I am really anxious, a lot of people would come in maybe at a 6 or a 7 or an 8. They'd say, of course, I'm nervous. I don't even know what to do yet. I don't even know the names of the people I'm working with.
Hmm.
We come back after 90 days, there's a good chance you'd come in maybe at a 3 or a 4 or a 5. Now, what happened in those 90 days? Did you become a subject matter expert? No, you didn't. What happened was you kept going back to the same place. So, prolonged exposure therapy, let's say, for example, that someone was severely beaten and robbed at a bus stop
Hmm.
and now they've got PTSD. Elements of this would call on me they'd come in, they would tell their story in great detail.
Mm.
I would
Wow.
stop them and ask them more questions. We'd go through the story maybe in about 10 minutes. They would have recorded it on their phone. Then I'd ask them to tell their story again. Generally, it's about 3 times in one session. And they'd go home and listen to the recording every day, several times.
Wow.
And then eventually we would do the exposure on the phone and we would have to do exposure in the real world. So I might have them be driven by someone else past that bus stop. Just drive past it a couple of times this week. Now I'd like you to drive up to it and to stop. Next step would be drive up to it, step outside of the car, get back in.
Okay.
Then I'd like you to step out of the car, walk over to the bus stop, and
Hmm.
walk back to the car. And so there would be gradual exposure to the actual situation. Between the two, it is clinically very effective, but as you can tell, it's hard. It's very hard psychotherapy.
Yeah.
I just had a situation where a worker was struck, a really small woman. She was hit in the face by a man who was angry outside a hospital. The man hadn't received treatment. He came out and he hit her, and she's like 5 foot nothing.
Oh.
And so she came to me and she was having all of the symptoms that a person has right after a trauma. And
Hmm.
the symptoms that people have, acute stress disorder, are a normal reaction to an abnormal situation. Most
Okay.
people will have those. And she wanted trauma treatment.
Hmm.
And I said, so give me a sense of when you are planning to go back to work. And she said, well, I plan to go back to work in 6 weeks. And I said, that is not very long. And she said, well, I don't have a choice. I'm taking FMLA. I'm only going to get 6 weeks.
Hmm.
And so I walked her through what I might be able to do. And I said, in the 6 weeks, probably the most effective thing that we can do is prolonged exposure therapy. So we did that, squeezed into 6 weeks. Generally, this is about 3 months.
Wow. So did you meet twice a week?
We met once or twice a week.
Okay.
She listened to her story on her phone. And then very quickly, we got to a place where she had to go back to that entrance of the hospital. And it was drive into the parking lot, drive in, get out, get back in the car,
Hmm.
drive in, get out, have someone escort you, drive in, get out, have the person stay in the car and watch you walk.
Right.
And I said, this is going to be really hard. And I'm not absolutely sure it's going to work, given we only have this short amount of time. And she worked really hard.
Yeah.
The courage that this woman had was incredible.
Yeah.
And so she got there. She was able to get to a place where she could get out of the car and walk in with a minimal level of discomfort. And now she's back to work and everything is fine.
Wow.
So I offer those three intervention methods, and a lot of it has to do with how available is the person as
Hmm.
far as how many sessions, where are they? Are we doing it virtual or in person?
Hmm.
And then, unfortunately, managed care and money have something to do with this.
Yeah, that's the whole,
That's part of it
yeah,
also.
yeah.
So that's why I've learned three trauma treatments to offer as many options
Hmm.
to an individual who is suffering from trauma as I can.
Right.
And so if there is a student who wants to specialize in trauma, I would strongly suggest you start with one evidence-based treatment and maybe add another, and to remember that it is not going to be wall-to-wall trauma treatment. You can't do it. It's
Okay.
going to have to be trauma, and then maybe
Hmm.
some people with depression,
Hmm.
other people with anxiety, maybe another person with an adjustment disorder. But
Right.
you won't make it if you're in front of 6 people a day who need
Just
trauma work. You
right.
will be of no value to anyone after about a couple of years.
Right. Because like you have to keep your humanness because like to me, I would think I wouldn't be, I mean, I wouldn't be able to do it. That's for sure. As a therapist, even it also depends on the personality, right? Every personality is different as a therapist and what you're called to do, your niche, what you can handle, how you take care of yourself. But wall to wall trauma, you have to really become, I hate to say like robotic, because how do you hear that much sadness and pain all day long?
Right. If you ask the person to attach a level to their deepest, darkest fears, and they say, well, it's about right here, I would
Mm-hmm.
tell them I'm in it here with most
Mm.
people,
Yeah.
because there are things that have happened that they could not even imagine
Yeah.
happening in their lives.
Right.
But a clinician who specializes in trauma has to watch the number of hours they're in session
Mm-hmm.
doing trauma work. They have to be really careful.
Mm-hmm.
And we owe that to our patients to take care of ourselves. Otherwise, the work we do is not going to be effective. We will burn out, become wounded healers, and then we're not really going to be able to help anyone,
Right.
not even ourselves.
Yeah. And you get burnt out and then you're over the job. And then, and I know personally, people know my story. If you listen to my podcast, and you read my blog, I'm pretty open therapist, even though I know you probably were trained like this too. Like you need to not show any, you have to be this empty slate. You have to, it's the whole psychodynamic, like, and to me, I was working with adolescents. I had to be real. They could sniff that stuff out anyway. Like working with teenagers. And now things have shifted in my practice as well. But breaking the stigma of mental health, right? Especially in the workplace, because now you see one-on-one, but you're running a group practice, right? And you're offering these different kinds of training. But say there's a company owner right now who has a small company of like 100 employees or a school or a nonprofit, And they're saying, all right, how do I even start the open conversation of mental health or mental well-being in my company? What would be the first thing that you, is there a resource or a book, or do they say, or you just say, just contact me, for a free 15-minute consultation? Like, but I like to give practical tips to my listeners for, whoever's listening. So say that CEO or that company owner is wanting, okay, I know this is, or our church, right? Or faith-based community is like, all right, I need to have someone come and talk about mental well-being. Where do I start? What do I do?
One of the first things that you would do
Mm-hmm.
is realize there are resources right around you. So maybe in a company, getting in touch with human resources and asking them, what are you seeing? What's
Mm-hmm.
happening? What do these statistics say as far as employees and what they're dealing with? What do the numbers say in reference to days off, use of healthcare privileges and benefits? What are you seeing? And then bringing in senior leadership and asking them, what are you seeing? Bringing in managers. What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And that's going to start to give you a sense of what's happening. Also, tracking rates of turnover,
Ah,
resignations,
oh wow. Yeah.
also longevity of employees. Are you hiring people and then in 8 months, 8 to 10 months, they're gone, which is so expensive to
Mm-hmm.
do. So a lot of the information is right around you. Now, let's say you have discovered some problems. And let's say that HR and some of the managers have talked about how employees are really stressed, they're burned out, caseloads are really high. It could be an insurance company. Then your next step would be to reach out to a corporate trainer with a mental health background or reach out to your employee assistance program and ask them
Mm-hmm.
to bring in a trainer.
Okay.
And so that would be my role in either situation to come in. And I'd want to sit down first with senior leadership or human resources, whoever got the ball rolling,
Mm-hmm.
and get a sense of, well, what are you seeing? Why am I here? What are your goals? What do you want to do here? How do you think will the audience be open to talking about mental health? I've been in front of probably some of the toughest audiences, and that would be the military
Yeah.
and firefighters and police officers.
Mm-hmm.
So, as we all know, resistance is the problem of the therapist, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, um, if someone is like starting wanting to do what you do, right? Not the therapy part. Say it's a therapist. Say it's me, okay? And all of a sudden, because you experienced my first, I mean, I hate to say my first because I've trained teachers, in the high schools. I've done nonprofits in a small 10 group setting because it was a specific thing. I'm training them. I was good. And then I took that challenge because this year was my year to say, yes, I'm going to get uncomfortable and do something that instead of staying in a comfort zone. And I'm grateful that you were there to experience that with me, Bill, honestly. And you gave me some good tips and you were very encouraging because I had no idea your background. And you sat there with me, and I mean, you sat there and listened to me, and you could tell that a little bit. I was a little nervous here and there, but I love that. I love psychoeducational. I love encouraging. I love taking what I've learned in the last 2, 3 decades. I don't want to age us, but that's what it is, what it is. And I want to pass the baton to the next generation of therapists, or not even that, just in a group setting, you're helping a bigger group than the one-on-one. And so I'm seeing this happening within me at this moment without saying too much. But what would you say to me? What tips, or like, where do I go? Where do I start? How do I end up speaking in front of a bunch of people like you without going, where are my notes, and fumbling around with
Mhm. First of all, I'd right size your expectations. And that might be that, let's say you're doing a 1 hour presentation.
Mhm.
We'd go through the presentation, but I'd point out, well, the first slide is a title slide. The next slide is an introduction. The next slide after that are the bullet points that you are going to be going over, as in, here's what I'm going to tell you.
Mhm.
So that's about 4 slides there. At the end, there is the summation. You're taking time for questions, and then you're finishing up. So that's about 4 more slides. So 8 slides are going to be pretty easy. Then, if you add questions to it, if you have a 60-minute presentation, you're actually going to be speaking for about 45 minutes, and the other stuff is going to be really easy. And so you're down to 45 minutes. And when I teach people how to do PowerPoints, I teach them how to lib off of the PowerPoint,
Mm.
meaning you know the material. You don't present a PowerPoint that looks like a crossword puzzle. It's usually 3 or 4 lines with a few words, and that's it. And you should be able to ad lib off of that. Make sure you breathe. And one of the best ways to get relaxed and to win over an audience is get there early and talk to people.
Mm. Wow. Yeah.
So in my
Okay.
presentations, I'm in the middle of doing a series of modules with a large company and it's live. I get there early and people are sitting around and I walk around and it's in the morning. So someone might be munching on a bagel and I'll ask them, how's breakfast?
Mm.
Usually a bagel every morning. I'll walk around, say hello. I'll thank them for being there. I'll just make chit chat with
Yeah.
them. And that's a really important part of the presentation,
Hmm.
being able to connect with the audience and talk to them before. And then look for opportunities to walk around. I do my best work when I'm not in front of a podium. I'm walking around, I'm chatting with people, I'm asking them questions directly.
Hmm.
What do you think?
Right.
I saw a head nod over here. Is that what your thought is?
Oh.
So my style is to engage directly with the audience. And when you're doing that, there is even a reduced amount of time, even
Mhm.
more of subject matter and more personality and connecting to the audience. And then also learn to breathe, learn to do inhale for 3, hold for 1, exhale for 6. I
Okay.
did that when I worked as a reporter at times.
Oh,
There were
wow.
times when it's called a double box in TV. So here's the anchor on in one box, and
Hmm.
up pops Bill. The anchor says Bill Prasad is standing by live at
Hmm.
the scene of the fire. Well, at times I would be standing there and I would do my breathing exercises.
Okay.
No one would know, and I would just slow everything down. I learned very early that the faster that I speak, the greater chance I'm going to go blank.
Mm.
And if I speak really fast, people who are watching and listening will think that's rather odd. It'll make them uncomfortable.
Hmm.
And so I learned a long time ago to slow down, relax. And then one person in TV news, when I would always look at the tape of my work, looking for things I could do better. And he
Yeah.
walked by, he looked at me, he looked at the tape, looked back at me, and he said, Bill, you're never as good as you think you are, and you're never as bad as you think you are.
Oh, wow. That's
Well, there's an interesting perspective.
yeah, I
I
love
get
that.
what he's saying.
Yeah, you're never as good as you think you are. You're never as bad as you think you are. Love that. That's like that's grounding right there. That's like, yeah,
Mhm.
okay. What's the worst thing that can happen at that
Right.
moment? I don't know. I mean, listen, I'm grateful that you were there and you gave me some of those tips. It was a subject that, made people uncomfortable. I'm trying to do it right by it without being political or anything like that, right? I was just trying to give information to make people understand. So maybe you could ask Whitney if you're coming next year that you be a speaker. What do you think of that?
That'd be a lot of fun. I am definitely going to be there.
Yes, me
Um,
too.
I would love to present. I have presented on a topic that takes a look at the Bible and the
Hmm.
DSM. And we know what the DSM says about mental illness. What does the Bible say about
Yes.
mental illness? What does the Bible say about Jesus and stress?
Oh my goodness. Oh,
And
please, please, because when she does that, I think she puts a call out to speakers or whatever, or a call to act, a call, whatever. Casting. No, it's not a casting. Wrong career, Diana. So for me, I would love that. I would love to learn about that and get to see you on that and just that or how you went from solo to group because we didn't even touch that. It's been an hour already. We've already had communication. I usually like to, wind it down now. So to me, like maybe I'll have to have you on again just about business skills and group practice and all that. But Bill, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. I also would like to know if you have any final words for the audience.
sure, please believe in yourself and capture opportunities to build resilience. Sometimes we just don't take advantage of what's around us. Sometimes we're in a dark place and we think that it's never ending, but there is a way out. There's something called the Stockdale paradox, where at times, if you think that, and you look at a situation and you think that, well, it could get a little worse, but eventually I will get out of it.
Mm-hmm.
It's called the Stockdale paradox.
Stop.
Things might get a little worse, but I will get through this.
Yes. Yes, we will get through this because right now, like ever since 2020, I think we've all been trying to get through this.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so, guys, like for all my listeners here that are listening at this moment, he's right. Like, see what the resources, get connected. I know sometimes we get stuck in emotions, but understand this that I know what I believe. My listeners understand if you listen to my podcast that I am a believer, a disciple of Jesus Christ. And we have to understand that we are here for a purpose and a reason. And, you could figure that out. Just be still,
Mhm.
understand, and know that you are resilient. Like our cells are meant to heal.
Mhm.
If we're talking scientifically, like, right, you get a wound, it heals over. And it's the same for our mind and our heart, and just seek help. There's nothing to be embarrassed about, or it's not a weakness. Actually, it's a strength when you can say, I need help,
Mhm.
you know?
Yes.
So again, Bill, thank you so much for coming on. And listener, don't ever forget to trust in the Lord, guard your heart, and renew your mind. Bye.
Bye-bye.
And now for the disclaimer to make sure you understand that you are responsible for you. The content provided on the Holistic Counselor podcast is for entertainment and informational purposes only and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical or mental condition. Never disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking it because of something you have heard on this podcast. The views expressed on this podcast are my personal opinions and do not represent the views of any professional organizations with which I am affiliated. Call your doctor, 911, or 988 immediately if you have a medical emergency. The Holistic Counselor podcast does not recommend or endorse any specific tests, physicians, products, procedures, opinions, or other information that may be mentioned on the podcast. Reliance on any information provided by the Holistic Counselor podcast, guests appearing on the podcast at the invitation of the Holistic Counselor podcast, or other listeners to the podcast is solely at your own risk. Confidentiality notice. If you engage with the Holistic Counselor podcast by commenting or posting and are a client, please be aware that you may be revealing information that could compromise your confidentiality. Please remember that disclosing your identity or personal details can be linked to your clinical material. As a therapist, I am bound by confidentiality and will not respond to any disclosures of this type on this podcast. I am committed to upholding the ethics and confidentiality of the therapeutic relationship, which extends to all forms of communication in accordance with the laws and professional guidelines that govern mental health professionals. I want you to know that your privacy is of utmost importance, and you are responsible for protecting it when interacting on this platform or any other public forum. Thank you.